If I look like a little bit paranoid during the recording of this video, just know that I was just swarmed by about 10 leeches, and it kind of freaked me out. So now I'm like, yeah, a little bit paranoid. Man, they're big fuckers, man. Jesus. In case you're wondering, my batteries ran out, so I couldn't use my audio recorder. So, with the power of improvisation, I'm using my iPhone recorder. And so hopefully the audio quality is at least decent. So I was going through my notes and I came across an interesting question regarding going through an existential crisis, pointing to my Iboga experience. And I'm sure most of you have heard about my Iboga trip, but basically it was a really dark psychedelic existential crisis that left me in the abyss, let's say, for quite a long time. And it took me a while to get out of it. And while I was in it, I thought all hope was gone, you know? It was like a fundamental shift of my perception where I went through this really extreme nihilistic mindset of that the world is meaningless, right? There is no point to this. We just suffer and we die, and it's like a cruel joke sort of thing, you know? So I understand that mindset, and I've definitely integrated and moved past since then. So I did want to read a question which I think a lot of people can relate to. And I don't remember who wrote it. I just remember writing it down from reading a comic. So I'm like, this is a really good question. So, you guys are hella cute and vibey. Talking about me and my girlfriend. My fiance now, actually. Thank you. And yeah, it warms my heart seeing Tom feeling happy and grounded, because last time I watched him, he was going through hell because of that Iboga experience. Not sure if you want to see this, but I have a few questions. 1, was that dark post-Iboga period something you're grateful now that it passed? 2, if you could go back into the past, would you do it again knowing that it's going to get really dark? 3, how it affected your quality of life and general well-being after you've processed it? And, sorry, I'm feeling... Jesus! Start screaming, like I'm pissing out blood. No, seriously, man, this is crazy. Like, right now I'm in Melbourne, Belgrave, during the winter time. And it's really cold and crisp, but I also like the oxygen. I feel like it's a little bit more crisp and fresh during the winter, but you get more leeches and whatnot. But what would be your advice for people who are going through drug-induced existential crisis? Thank you for your work, Tom. Your channel has helped me go through some hard periods because you're one of the very few ones I could relate to. Cheers, mate. Oh, no worries. Thanks for watching the channel. I appreciate it, and definitely not alone. I think this problem is becoming more and more common. You don't have to have a psychedelic trip to go into an existential crisis, but it's definitely more likely that you will. And the kind of existential crisis that can be triggered by a psychedelic can be a lot more potent and overwhelming, right? And so I'm going to answer this question by question. So the first one, was that dark post-Iboga period something you're grateful now that it has passed? Yeah, listen, I'm grateful for everything that happened to my life, even all the bad stuff. And not because there was no other way for my life to turn out, but it's more of a mode of being. It's a mindset of just being more grateful. Seems to be a lot more pragmatic and better for your well-being than sitting in a state of despair and regret, right? Because you can't change the past. Like, even if you fucked up, you fucked up. Move on, integrate it, make it good. And that's the kind of nature of good and evil, at least from my framework, is that I believe that creation is inherently good and that evil is a privation of good. So in other words, good can live without evil, but evil cannot live without good. Sort of like a parasite or a virus or a disease. It cannot sustain itself on its own. It has to feed on a host, on a body, something that's good and alive. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because from my opinion, I think through God's grace, I was able to really gain some positives from that experience. So in other words, no matter how much shit you've gone through in your life, no matter how dark of a spot you've found yourself stuck in, there's always a greater good. Doesn't mean that it's good in and of itself, but there's always a greater good that you can extract from so-called evil, right? And I'm grateful for that. So I'm grateful for just the nature of reality, and just I'm grateful for how it played out, you know? And I'm very grateful for that experience because it taught me a lot, right? But leading on to the next question, if you could go back into the past, would you do it again knowing that it's going to get really dark? Well, it's a bit of a paradoxical question, because if I knew everything that I know now and then I was to go back in time, would I do it again? No. Why would I? That was just a lot of pain and suffering, and it kind of put my life on pause for a long time. And it needed to at the time, but if I was to go back and you were to erase my memory of everything that happens, would I do it again? Well, I guess I would, but I wouldn't be happy about it. There's definitely ways that I could have reached the knowledge that I've reached now without psychedelics, without going into an existential crisis. It definitely helped, I guess, me understand nihilism and really give me a huge challenge. So in a way, I'm grateful for it, because it was such an overwhelming dark pit that anything in life compared to it is like nothing, right? So less things bother me about life. I think this is kind of going into the next question, so I'll read it now. So just to reiterate, would I go back in the past knowing that's going to get really dark? I probably wouldn't, but then again, I was a really prideful, arrogant person who probably needed a slap. And I think I got warnings. You know, I kind of interpret that existential crisis as kind of God telling me, dude, you've gone completely the wrong direction. Turn back now, trust me. And so I did. And it kind of changed my whole worldview and belief system because of how much suffering that previous one brought me to. Now, so the next one, how it affected your quality of life and general well-being after you've processed it. The first 9 months, it was hell. I think it made me definitely more sad overall, too empathetic. I was going through this existential dread all the time and despair, and I didn't have faith and grounding, and I was confused and lost, and I was in this abyss of this meaninglessness, and it wasn't good. It wasn't fun, and I don't think it did me good at all, actually. I think it damaged me for that first initial period, but then afterwards, because I was in such a dark place and I had basically no choice, but if I don't overcome this and integrate it as a part of my being, I don't even want to think about where this would take me. So, I would say that it affected my quality of life. In the long term, I would say that, like I said before, little things don't bother me anymore. It's very hard to get me in the state of despair. I haven't gone through an existential dread phase in years, man. It's just not even a problem for me anymore, which is like, if I was to hear myself say this back in the past when I was in the middle of this, I wouldn't have believed you. I'd been like, no way. How can you come back after this? But you can. You just need grounding, because the whole thing about an existential despair is just like the emotional state of extreme nihilism, which is, in its essence, relativism, where all truth is relative, which is the same as saying there is no truth. So if there's no truth, there's no grounding, there's no constant, there's no purpose. Life is messed up. But when you have a grounding, when you have good principles to live by, and when you work from the ground up, i.e. eating healthy, lifting weights, finding a good partner, right? Whether you're a guy or a girl, I think me being in a relationship definitely helped a lot, and it wisened me up by allowing me to be more vigilant and not kind of falling into spiritual deception, which is very common. And that's the problem when you base your entire worldview, which I did in the past. I was an empiricist, right? So direct experience was like my number one standard of measurement for attaining truth. But the problem with basing your worldview on empiricism is that humans are fallible, man. Your emotions, your thoughts, your interpretations of a certain experience can be way off to the pure, raw experience itself. You know? I mean, how many times have all these different people experience the exact same thing, but then they come out of it with completely different worldviews? And I'm not saying that you can't directly experience truth, but there's a lot of things you can't directly experience. So it kind of taught me a harsh lesson, and I had to kind of rebuild my philosophy from the ground up and start from the start. What is truth? You know? What are the foundations of all these religions that I was subscribing to? And I think a lot of it was like, yes, the Iboga experience was like, it was a bad situation, but it was also an eventuality of my worldview and where it was going. So even if that Iboga didn't happen, there would have been some version of that in the future. So when you ask me, am I grateful that I experienced, I'm grateful that it happened to me early in life and not later. What would be your advice for people who are going through drug-induced existential crisis? Number one would be to stay away from drugs, even weed, alcohol, all of it. I mean, if you absolutely had to have, like if you're a complete addict and you just need something, otherwise you're going to do heroin, then stick with something at least mild, like tobacco or something like that. But I would stay away from mind-altering substances, because when you're in an existential crisis, you're in a vulnerable place where you're in the abyss, you're confused, you're lost, it's dark, wow, where am I? It's so painful. So then you need to get your grounding, you need to get your orientation, you need to find your North Star. And like I said, finding grounding principles, I think is very important. Something that's helped me, at least I remember first going into Hermeticism, and that helped a lot, but it does have its limits. And even though I agree with a lot of the truths from the laws itself, there are some limits to it, and what helped me a lot was actually finding Orthodox Christianity and going into learning about meaning and purpose and responsibility. Would start getting into your body, lifting weights is highly recommended, going into a sauna, and really getting you got to build from the ground up again, and it starts in your body. Well, it might not start in your body, but it's definitely an important aspect to remind yourself with. I'd really recommend eating clean. And actually what helped me, and this might be a very controversial thing, but the last thing that I did, which kind of I overcame the existential crisis, but there was still, it wasn't there, but I could sort of sense it through my peripheral. You know what I mean? And it would come back a little bit. It was mild and nowhere near as bad as it was before, but it was still, I couldn't say that I was 100% cured from it. And I think the last thing that I did, or one of the most powerful things that I did, was start eating meat again, because I was a vegan for 3 years. And I think that definitely affected my mental health, and meat really grounded me. I just had this spiritual, physical, orgasmic experience, and again, it changed my whole reality of, it changed my whole perception on meat eating. And it really, after that, I haven't had no depression, anxiety in small amounts, but that's only when I'm excited. For example, if I'm about to do a podcast, I might get a little bit of anxiety, but day-to-day anxiety, no, I'm pretty chill, man. I'm genuinely pretty good. It just took a lot of work, and I think at the start of my existential crisis, I think talking to someone really helps. If you don't have any close friends or family, I'd recommend hiring a therapist, but someone who's who's been through this stuff before, or at least understands it, because I don't know, maybe I'm just being rude, but I think that most therapists might not help you with this, because they're in the psychology realm. That's the thing about going through an existential crisis, which I said is just a symptom of nihilism, really. And nihilism is a lot deeper than what the extreme nihilist of what most people think of, right? It actually starts off very subtle, and a lot of the new age is actually pure nihilism, but it has a spiritual kind of body to it. But I think when it comes to going through an existential crisis, it kind of requires a spiritual solution. You know what I mean? What does that mean? This could mean pray to God, start a communication. Join a community. I guess different philosophies work for different people, but I think most philosophies will lead you into nihilism, right? So if any philosophy is based on relativism, if you logically follow that and you are consistent with that philosophy and you match it with your actions, it will always lead you into the abyss, right? And it can be mild versions or really advanced, extreme versions. And I think first you're going to understand what is truth, So that's why it's really important to understand what is truth. How do you ground this? And kind of understand that there really is a structure and intelligence and a purpose to all of this. And the beauty about having free will is that we don't have to do anything, right? We can fall off the dark path. And I feel again, that's what kind of this existential crisis is in a lot of ways. It's like a sign to turn the fuck around, dude. You've gone too far into meaninglessness. Go towards meaning, And that's the beauty about being a human being, is that we're in this mediator stage of, we're the mediator between heaven and earth. And if you look back on the ancient perspective of what heaven and earth means, it was heaven meant abstract principles, right? Immaterial truths, if you want to call it that. Like laws of logic, numbers would fall into this category, I guess. And then you have earth, which is raw, meaningless data. So, and then the human being is the mediator between both. So we inform matter with meaning and express meaning with matter. We lower heaven and raise earth. And that's the purpose. That's why, like, the whole purpose of this is, in a way, to bring heaven onto earth, right? It's a very kind of like biblical, old school biblical idea, but I think there is some very profound truth to that. Because the problem of being a materialist is that you're only going to look at the earth. And of course, you're going to be like, yeah, it's just chemicals, it's just mechanical nonsense. There's no intelligence to this. But then the spiritual absolutist will go too much in the sky and only look at the abstract and kind of cutting the cord between life and truth. And that's, again, I'm not surprised why more and more people every day are going into these dark existential despair, because their philosophical framework was kind of, it was set up to fail from the very beginning, you know? And it's not just about philosophy, but it's definitely very important to how you approach life. Because it's like a compound effect, you know, down the track, that's when you really notice the fruits of your philosophy. So it's very important, I think, especially when you're going through existential crisis, is to ground yourself, and grounding yourself on all scales of reality. Because remember, truth, as this is how I see truth anyway, is that truth should be coherent and consistent and reflect on all scales of reality, not only the spiritual realm, which it makes sense, but then in the physical dimension, it's like, where's this truth you're talking about? You know what I mean? But I think grounding yourself is really, really important. Definitely. You know, eating heavy food. Like, I'll seriously recommend eating meat. Good quality, maybe some wild caught meat or salmon or eggs or something kind of heavy to ground you, to put you in your body. And then lift weights and put effort into that. Sweat. Go to the sauna. Clean your room. Clean your room, bucko. Well, you know, you got to clean your room, you know? Jordan Peterson. But for real, you got to, like, cleaning your room and just doing the everyday, mundane, normal stuff. Because we've been too overly sensationalized with all the spirituality that we've forgotten the physical realm. And while during the time, you know, you think that you're really wise and you're developing spiritually, but then in reality, you're just escaping reality. In reality, you're escaping reality. But, you know, I hope that you guys know what I'm trying to say. You know, I'm sure there's a lot more you can do, and I'm sure as soon as I finish this video, there's going to be like, oh, I could have done this, this, and this. And I'll continue these series of videos. And, you know, if you guys have any questions and want me to break down anything, you can either leave a comment below this video, or you can even email me. You know, I think the more detailed your question, especially if you share your own story, the better. That way we can all relate to this stuff. But yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate it. If you want to support us and get exclusive content, you can go on patreon.com/yourmatetom. It's with you guys. You guys are basically the reason that sustains this channel, and I really, really appreciate it. Especially with, you guys know how YouTube is, but yeah. Anyways, I'm going to enjoy this walk. And it's actually starting to get a little bit dark, but yeah. Appreciate you watching, and hopefully I get an actual proper mic. I look like a... What is he doing with his phone, mate? Fucking... You can always derive a greater good, even from the most darkest periods. But don't confuse that with that thing itself was good. Because then if you think that anything bad that happens to you is all meant to happen, then you're just a leaf in the wind, and you're going to let the kind of laws of nature control you, instead of you having your own will and finding your own way, finding some stability. I think that's very important. Yeah, that's it, man. Have a good one. And I hope I answered your question to a satisfactory manner. And I'll catch you guys on the next video. Peace.